My name is Alexandra Pierce, though everyone just calls me Alex. I'm 33, and for the last 10 years, I've built a life for myself as an art curator in Chicago, deliberately putting hundreds of miles between me and my mother, Beatrice, and her suffocating control. Our relationship was a minefield, always had been, but even I couldn't have predicted what would happen at her 65th birthday dinner at Aurelia. There we were, surrounded by family in that temple of modern cuisine, when she tapped her champagne flute with a manicured nail. Her eyes, cold as ice, found mine across the table, and a triumphant smirk played on her lips as she declared, "I'm officially removing Alexandra from my will." A hush fell over the entire private room. I simply offered a small, serene smile and replied, "That doesn't really matter anymore, Mom, because..." But before I tell you the rest of that story, I'm curious where you're all tuned in from. Drop a comment below and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, especially if you've ever had to find the strength to stand up to a difficult family. Growing up in our stately Chestnut Hill townhouse in Philadelphia wasn't the picturesque dream it looked like from the street. My mother, Beatrice, was a product of old money, the kind of inherited wealth that seeps into your bones and dictates your every perception of the world. My earliest memories of her are of a woman who was always flawlessly styled, perpetually composed, and relentlessly demanding. No matter what I accomplished, it was never quite up to her standards. My father, Arthur, was a world apart. He'd built his own empire in commercial real estate, a self-made man who never lost touch with his more humble middle-class origins. He was the one who nurtured my imagination and celebrated my independent streak, much to my mother's quiet but very obvious disapproval. The time I spent with him in his wood-paneled study, poring over art history books while he wove tales about the great masters, those were the brightest spots of my childhood. All of that warmth and light vanished when I was 10. My father suffered a sudden, fatal heart attack, and in an instant, he was gone. He left behind a daughter utterly shattered by grief, and also a very substantial inheritance that was legally designated to be held in trust for me. But of course, Beatrice took charge of everything, absorbing funds that were meant to be separate into the larger family pool. I was too young to grasp the financial machinations, but I was old enough to feel the profound, aching void left by the only person who had ever made me feel truly seen. Just 2 years later, while the wound of my father's loss was still raw, Beatrice remarried. Harrison Vance was one of my father's business associates, a tall, distinguished man with an unnervingly calculated charm. He slid into our home, bringing with him his perfectly polished golf clubs and collection of bespoke suits, taking over my father's spaces with an ease that suggested he'd always belonged there. My mother's personality seemed to shift overnight. She became even more obsessed with appearances, social climbing, and the rigid hierarchy of our world. A year after the wedding, my half-brother Leo was born, and 18 months after that, my half-sister Chloe arrived. Just like that, I was no longer just the grieving daughter. I was the odd piece in a new family puzzle, a remnant of a past life. Beatrice's favoritism was not a subtle thing. While my new siblings were treated to extravagant birthday parties, complete with miniature ponies and professional entertainers, my own 13th birthday was marked by little more than a passing comment. When Leo expressed a fleeting interest in tennis, a private coach was hired immediately. When Chloe decided she wanted to try ballet, she was enrolled in classes with a retired prima ballerina. My deep, abiding passion for art, however, was consistently brushed aside as a childish and impractical fantasy. I remember winning a citywide art competition when I was 14. Beatrice didn't even bother to show up for the awards ceremony. "Creative pursuits are hobbies, Alexandra, not careers," she stated coolly over breakfast the next day, her words like little shards of glass. "You will eventually join the family enterprise. It's best you start focusing on economics and business." Harrison, for his part, was never overtly cruel. He was worse. He was a silent enforcer, reinforcing every one of Beatrice's doctrines with a placid smile. "Your mother knows what's best," he would murmur whenever I dared to protest. The Vance children understand the value of a family legacy. That phrase, "the Vance children," was his favorite weapon, a quiet, constant reminder that I was a Pierce, not a Vance, a permanent guest in my own home. By the time I was 16, I had perfected the art of living a double life. I dutifully joined the mock trial team and enrolled in AP macroeconomics just as I was told. But my weekends were my own secret rebellion. I would spend hours at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, sketching the sculptures and losing myself in the galleries. It was my art teacher, a wonderful woman named Miss Caldwell, who saw the fire in me. She began mentoring me, lending me books, and quietly suggesting I look into art schools and scholarships. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. I saw a potential escape route. The college application season became my personal declaration of independence. Beatrice had a precise life plan for me: Wharton School of Business, then a guaranteed position at the family's investment firm. I filled out the Wharton application under her watchful eye. But in secret, I also sent applications to the art history programs at the University of Chicago and Columbia. When the acceptance letters started to arrive, I finally found the courage to make my stand. "I'm going to the University of Chicago," I announced one evening at dinner, placing my acceptance letter on the polished surface of our antique mahogany table. "They've offered me a partial scholarship for their art history department." Beatrice's face went rigid. "Don't be absurd. We've been over this. Wharton has a place for you." "I never wanted that place," I shot back, my voice trembling but firm. "Dad would have wanted this for me." Invoking my father's name was a critical mistake. Beatrice slammed her hand down on the table, the force of it making the crystal water goblets tremble. "Your father is not here. I am, and I am the one who knows what is best for your future." Later that evening, Harrison came to my room to offer what he termed a compromise. They would consent to pay for UChicago, but only if I agreed to double major in business. "Meet your mother halfway, Alex," he urged, his tone oozing false reason. "Family harmony is worth a small sacrifice." I agreed, but I didn't tell him that the scholarship, combined with the money I planned to earn waitressing, would cover the majority of my costs anyway. I was already mapping out my true escape, not just from their academic dictates, but from their suffocating control for good. That summer, I worked 2 jobs relentlessly and sold off the ostentatiously expensive jewelry they had given me for my 16th birthday. I was building a secret escape fund, a nest egg they had no idea existed. The day I finally packed my bags and moved to Chicago was the first day in a decade that I felt like I could take a full, deep breath. My cramped shared apartment in Hyde Park was a world away from the opulent luxury of Chestnut Hill, but every cheap poster I hung on the wall, every mismatched coffee mug I bought from a thrift store, was mine. It was my choice. For the very first time, I was building a life that was authentically, unapologetically my own, brick by determined brick. Chicago welcomed me with open arms, like a city that had been waiting for my arrival. The rumble of the L train, the relentless energy of the streets, the sheer density of museums and galleries on every corner. This vibrant, chaotic metropolis felt more like home than the sterile, museum-like perfection of my mother's house ever had. University life was demanding in ways I hadn't fully prepared for. The business classes Beatrice had forced on me were as soul-crushingly tedious as I had feared, but I pushed through and excelled in them, driven by a stubborn need to prove I could. It was my art history classes, though, that made my spirit soar. A professor, Dr. Evans, noticed my engagement during a seminar on underappreciated female artists of the modernist period. After class, she pulled me aside and invited me to a gallery opening. "You have a gift, Alex," she told me, observing me as I studied a particularly challenging abstract piece. "You see the story behind the canvas, not just the image on it." That night was a turning point. At the gallery, I was introduced to Genevieve Dubois, a Franco-American gallery owner in her late 60s, all silver-haired elegance and razor-sharp intellect. When I nervously offered my interpretation of an obscure painting tucked away in a corner, she listened intently. Then she introduced me to the artist himself. "You should intern for me," she offered later over a glass of champagne. "The pay is insulting, but the education is unparalleled." I accepted on the spot. The internship was grueling, demanding my weekends and evenings on top of my double major course load. But Genevieve became the mentor I had desperately needed my whole life. She taught me to look beyond the surface, to identify emerging talent before the market did, and most importantly, to trust my own eye. "The truly great collections," she once told me, "are built by people who recognize genius before it becomes a consensus." My contact with my family, meanwhile, dwindled to a bare minimum. Our monthly phone calls were a predictable script. Beatrice would interrogate me about my life choices and issue pointed reminders about the position waiting for me at Vance Investments. My half-siblings, now in their teens, were morphing into perfect little replicas of their parents. Leo was already boasting about his early acceptance to Wharton, and Chloe had mastered the same condescending head tilt Beatrice deployed whenever she was disappointed. After I graduated, Genevieve offered me a full-time position at her gallery. The salary was modest, but it was my official entry into the art world I'd dreamed of. When I called Beatrice to share the news, her reaction was as dismissive as I'd expected. "A glorified salesgirl," she sighed dramatically into the phone. "Well, when you're finished with your little career experiment, do let us know." Her words were meant to cut deep, and they did, but they also solidified my resolve. I dedicated myself to learning every facet of the business: authentication, restoration, market valuation, and the fine art of networking with discerning collectors. I lived in a sixth-floor walk-up with 2 roommates and subsisted on a diet of instant ramen, but I was happy. Every day was a new education. My big break came about 3 years later at an estate sale in a sleepy town in Connecticut. The former owner was a reclusive ex-diplomat with a sprawling, eclectic collection. While other buyers swarmed the obvious valuables, the antique silverware and ornate furniture, I felt an unexplainable pull toward a grimy, dust-covered painting hanging in a dim back hallway. The style was unmistakable, even though the signature was obscured by years of neglect. After a close, heart-pounding examination, I was 99% sure it was an early, unknown work by an artist whose later pieces were selling for 7 figures. I liquidated everything I had, my rent money, my grocery budget, my savings, and bought it for $9,500. Genevieve thought I had lost my mind right up until the moment we had it professionally cleaned and authenticated. 2 months later, we sold it at auction for $120,000. My commission was enough for me to finally get my own apartment. It was tiny, but it was mine. That single success gave me the confidence to start taking calculated risks. I began cultivating relationships with overlooked estate lawyers and small-town auction houses, the kinds of places where forgotten masterpieces might be hiding in plain sight. I started to build a reputation as a curator with a preternatural ability to find value where no one else was looking. Wealthy clients began to seek me out, trusting my eye to build their private collections. It was during this period that I met Mark, an architect whose firm specialized in the adaptive reuse of historic buildings. We hit it off at a gallery opening, where he seemed more captivated by the building's original crown molding than the art on display. His quiet confidence and practical creativity were a breath of fresh air compared to the aggressive, performative ambition I had been raised around. "You talk about paintings the way I talk about architecture," he remarked on our 3rd date, "as if they're living things with their own histories to tell." Mark became my partner in every sense of the word. He supported my increasingly ambitious career, gamely accompanying me to dusty estate sales in the middle of nowhere, and he never once questioned my fierce need for independence. When the trust fund my father had left me finally became accessible on my 30th birthday, I refused to touch a penny of it. Mark understood completely without needing a long explanation. What no one knew, not Beatrice, not Harrison, not even Mark at first, was that I had begun making my own strategic investments. Every significant commission I earned was funneled into acquiring carefully selected works by undervalued artists. I kept them in a secure, climate-controlled storage facility, registered under an LLC, with a name that couldn't be traced back to me. It was my secret, my insurance policy against ever having to depend on my family's money or their approval ever again. The irony was rich. I had become an investor after all, just not the type Beatrice had ever imagined. Instead of shuffling paper assets to maximize profit margins, I was building something real, something with cultural weight and personal meaning, as well as monetary worth. 6 years into my career, I received an embossed invitation to the annual Vance family vacation in the Hamptons. I had dodged the trip for the last 3 years, always citing a work conflict. This time, Beatrice's personal assistant called me relentlessly, insisting my attendance was non-negotiable. Official family portraits were being taken for the new Vance Foundation website, she explained. Reluctantly, I agreed to go, bringing Mark along for moral support. The weekend was a masterclass in passive aggression. Beatrice would introduce me as my daughter, Alexandra, who works in a little gallery in Chicago, while Leo was lauded as our financial prodigy, despite being fresh out of business school. Chloe, now in law school, was the family's future legal mastermind. My mother expertly guided every conversation toward topics where I couldn't compete: property portfolios, stock market gains, trust fund management. On our final night, as we all sat on the sprawling deck watching the sunset, Beatrice casually brought up her concern for my financial well-being. "We've carved out a position for you, you know," she said, as if bestowing a great honor, something that would suit your creative sensibilities. The family's art collection needs to be properly managed. I almost choked on my wine. The family collection was a soulless portfolio of safe, investment-grade pieces chosen by financial advisors, with no passion or real insight behind them. The offer was just another gilded leash, another attempt to pull me back into her orbit. "I'm doing just fine on my own, Beatrice," I told her quietly. "Are you, dear?" Her smile was razor-sharp. "From what we understand, curating in Chicago barely covers the rent. It's time to be practical, Alexandra." I didn't bother to correct her. I didn't tell her that my personal collection, tucked away in that secure storage unit, had just been appraised at over $3 million. Let her think I was floundering. Let her believe that sooner or later I would have no choice but to come crawling back. What I didn't know then was that my quiet little rebellion was on a collision course with a family secret that was about to change the entire game. The letter showed up on a rainy Tuesday forwarded from my old apartment building. The return address was a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside, a brief formal note stated they were executing the estate of Edward Sterling, my maternal grandfather, who had passed away over 20 years ago. It turned out that a clause in his will dictated that certain information was to be delivered to his grandchildren upon their 33rd birthday. I had celebrated mine just last month. Tucked inside the main envelope was a smaller, sealed one, my name written on it in a spidery, unfamiliar script. I opened it. Inside was a letter and a small, antique-looking key. "My dear Alexandra," it began, "if you are reading this, then I have been gone for a very long time, and you have grown into a woman I wish I could have known. There are things about our family your mother may not have told you." I sank down onto my sofa, the letter trembling in my hand. My memories of my grandfather were hazy at best. A tall, quiet man with kind eyes who passed away when I was about 12. Beatrice rarely spoke of him, and when she did, it was usually to mention how he had lacked business acumen and squandered opportunities. The letter painted a completely different picture. Edward Sterling had not been the financial failure Beatrice portrayed him as. He had been an avid art collector with an astonishingly good eye, quietly amassing a significant collection throughout the 1950s and 60s, a time when many now legendary artists were still affordable. This collection was his secret passion, kept entirely separate from the family's primary business. "Your grandmother never understood my fascination with these scribbles, as she called them," he wrote. "And your mother inherited her mother's practical mind. But you, Alex, even as a little girl, you had a spark of wonder about beauty that always reminded me of myself. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely read." My grandfather wrote that before his death, he had grown deeply concerned that his beloved collection would be liquidated for a quick profit. So he had placed the entire collection into a secure storage facility with a 50-year prepaid lease. The key in the envelope was for that unit. More importantly, he had established a legal trust that named his grandchildren as the direct beneficiaries, bypassing Beatrice completely. "The collection belongs to you and your cousins now," he concluded, "though I have a feeling you may be the only one who will truly grasp what it contains. Trust your eye, Alexandra. It will always serve you better than a balance sheet." I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, I called in sick to work, booked a train ticket to Philadelphia, and went to find the storage facility. It took hours. The address was in an old industrial park that had been partially redeveloped. When I finally found the building, now operating under a new name as a high-end art storage business, I was sure it was a dead end. But incredibly, after some digging, they found the records for the trust. A manager verified my identity and led me through a series of climate-controlled corridors to a large private room. He unlocked the main exterior door, then left me alone to use my grandfather's key on the inner lock. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I saw when I opened that door. The room was packed with carefully wrapped paintings, sculptures, and portfolios of works on paper. At a glance, I recognized the styles of artists I'd only studied in textbooks: abstract expressionists, early pop art pioneers, minimalists who would later become titans of the art world. These weren't just random pieces. They were significant works from pivotal moments in each artist's career. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, carefully unwrapping items, taking photographs, and checking for signatures. With every piece I uncovered, my astonishment deepened. My grandfather had collected these masters when they were just starting out, when their revolutionary work was affordable to a man of relatively modest means but extraordinary taste. Now, decades later, many of these individual pieces would fetch millions at auction. The next day, back in Chicago, I contacted Elena Harrison, a top art lawyer I had worked with on complex authentication cases. After I laid out the whole unbelievable story, showing her the photos and the letter, she agreed to help me navigate the legal maze of verifying ownership and appraising the collection. "If this is all authentic, and if that trust is as solid as it sounds," she said, her voice measured, "then you are sitting on a fortune, Alex. But family claims on estates like this can get messy. We need to be meticulous." Over the following months, we worked in secret. Elena confirmed the legal standing of the trust. It was airtight. My grandfather had been brilliant. The collection legally belonged to his grandchildren, with provisions for professional management until we formally claimed it. My cousins on my mother's side, distant relatives I hardly knew, would have to be contacted eventually. But as the one who had discovered the collection, I had the primary right to oversee its management. In parallel, I brought in a team of trusted experts to authenticate the key works. Each confirmation was a mix of pure elation and mounting strategic anxiety. A single painting, an early masterpiece by an artist who had died tragically young, was valued at over $15 million. The preliminary estimate for the entire collection was upwards of $85 million. I was facing a massive ethical crossroads. Legally, I had no obligation to tell my mother a thing. The trust was designed specifically to exclude her, but keeping a secret of this magnitude felt wrong. I finally confided in Mark, showing him the trove of photographs from the storage unit. "Your grandfather wanted you to have this," he said simply after listening to the entire story. "He went to great lengths to make sure you found it, away from your mother's influence." But $85 million, Mark, that changes absolutely everything. "Only if you let it," he replied, taking my hand. "The real question is, what would you do differently, knowing you have this security?" His question cut through my panic. The truth was, I wouldn't change much about my life. I loved my work, our apartment, the world we had built together. The collection wasn't a ticket to a new life, it was freedom. It was security. It was the ultimate validation. I made a decision. I would secure the collection completely before I said a word to anyone in my family. Working with Elena, we had every piece insured and relocated to a state-of-the-art facility in New York, all managed under a new trust that I controlled. We painstakingly researched the provenance of every single item, confirming my grandfather had acquired it all legally and ethically. The entire process took nearly 6 months of intense, clandestine work. All the while, on the surface, my life went on as usual. I took on new clients, visited galleries, had dinner with Mark's parents, and every few weeks, Beatrice would call, usually to remind me of some family duty or to subtly probe whether I was still making ends meet in my little career. Each one of those conversations was an exercise in extreme self-control. I was sitting on a piece of information that would detonate our family's entire power structure, and I couldn't say a word until every legal document was signed and sealed. The weight of the secret was immense, but it was also strangely empowering. For the first time in my life, I held all the cards. I possessed knowledge that would force Beatrice to see me not as a disappointment, but as an equal. Just as Elena's work was nearing completion, I received an engraved invitation, Beatrice's 65th birthday celebration, 2 months away. The timing felt like fate. By then, everything would be finalized. It would be the perfect stage to finally reveal what I had found and to show them all who I had become, without any of their help or approval. The weeks leading up to Beatrice's birthday were a symphony of escalating family pressure. Beatrice herself called twice to confirm my attendance, each call peppered with casual remarks designed to undermine me. "Leo just made partner, you know," she mentioned airily during our second call, youngest in the firm's history. "That's wonderful," I said, my teeth clenched. "Please tell him I said congratulations." "He's always had such drive," she continued, a subtle dig at me. "That Vance focus. Speaking of which, Harrison and I were discussing your future again. That position managing the family's art assets is still available. Given your experience, it really would be a perfect fit." It was the same old dance. Dangle a job that came with 1,000 invisible strings, lure me back to Philadelphia, place me under Harrison's supervision, and force me to admit my independent life was a failure. It was their way of offering a rescue I didn't need. "Actually, I'm quite busy with several important clients right now," I replied, a half-truth that was easier than an outright battle. "Clients?" Beatrice echoed, the word dripping with disdain. "Well, do try to clear your schedule for the birthday weekend. The family photographer will be there. We need everyone present for the foundation portraits. The Vance Family Foundation was their latest vanity project, a charitable organization that did more to polish their social standing and provide tax benefits than it did to help anyone else. The promotional materials would, of course, feature a gallery of perfectly posed family photos, projecting an image of flawless unity and success." 2 weeks before the dinner, my half-sister Chloe called. Where Beatrice used manipulation, Chloe preferred direct condescension. "Mom's worried you're going to show up looking like some kind of starving artist," she said, skipping any preamble. "The dinner is at Aurelia, and some of the foundation's board members will be there. Could you at least try to wear something appropriate? I can help you shop if you need some money for a proper dress." The rage that shot through me was white hot. At 33, with a successful career and a net worth she couldn't even fathom, I was still being treated like a charity case. I took a deep breath. "I think I can manage to dress myself, Chloe. but thank you for the offer. Just trying to help, she chirped with false sweetness. Oh, and Leo mentioned you should probably prepare a little toast. You know, something about how Mom's guidance has shaped your life. Keep it brief. After hanging up, I paced my apartment, fuming. They weren't just guests, they were stage managing my every move, scripting my lines as if I were a bit player in their family drama. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to cancel, to just not go. But then I thought of my grandfather's collection, now legally mine, safe and secure. This performance, I decided, would be my last. The following weekend, I flew out for my cousin Olivia's wedding in Connecticut. Beatrice and Harrison were there, of course, holding court and making sure every distant relative knew about Leo's partnership and Chloe's acceptance to the law review. I tried to fly under the radar, chatting with relatives who were less entangled in the immediate family politics. My Aunt Caroline, Beatrice's younger and more rebellious sister, cornered me near the dessert table. "You look different," she said, studying my face with a shrewd gaze. "More settled. Like you know something the rest of us don't." "I'm doing well," I replied, cautious. Caroline and Beatrice had a notoriously fraught relationship, and I was never sure where her true allegiances lay. "Arthur would be so proud of you," she said softly, invoking my father's name. "He always said you had a steel spine hidden under all that politeness." Her words caught me completely off guard. "You and Dad were close?" "Close enough," she said, her voice dropping. "Close enough for him to tell me he was worried about Beatrice's plans for the family money, about making sure you were protected." Before I could press her for more, Harrison materialized at my elbow, smoothly redirecting the conversation to safer, more superficial topics. But Caroline's knowing look stayed with me. It was a hint that the family history I'd been fed my whole life was a heavily edited version. Back in Chicago, I began my preparations. I bought a dress, a stunning midnight blue silk sheath with clean architectural lines that subtly mirrored one of my favorite paintings. It was impeccably appropriate, yet completely my own style. I had Elena, my lawyer, prepare a concise summary of the trust documentation, highlighting the key points for a layperson to quickly grasp. Mark watched all this with a mix of awe and concern. "Are you absolutely sure you want to detonate this at her birthday party?" he asked one evening. "It's going to be nuclear." "That's exactly why it has to be there," I explained. "Any private conversation with Beatrice ends with her dismissing, deflecting, and rewriting history. I need an audience. I need to shatter the power dynamic in one clean break." The night before the dinner, I got a text from an unknown number. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember you have allies. See Caroline." The message was cryptic, but it was a lifeline. I wasn't going into this battle quite as alone as I thought. When the day of the party finally arrived, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This was it. Years of tension, resentment, and quiet struggle were all about to culminate in a single evening. Whatever happened, by morning, everything would be different. Mark kissed me at our apartment door. "Text me when it's over," he said. "I'll be at a bar nearby if you need a getaway driver." I smiled, grateful for his unwavering support, but I knew this was a confrontation I had to see through on my own. The black car Beatrice had sent arrived precisely on schedule. As we glided through the city streets toward the restaurant, I thought of my grandfather's letter, of the incredible legacy he had entrusted to me. It wasn't just a collection of valuable art, it was the courage to finally, fully claim my own place in the world. The stage was set, the cast was assembled, and for the first time in my life, I was the one directing the final act. Aurelia was a study in understated opulence. The maitre d' registered the Vance name and immediately ushered me toward a private dining room in the back. Glistening crystal glasses caught the light from minimalist chandeliers, and massive arrangements of white orchids served as centerpieces. The entire scene was pure Beatrice, astronomically expensive but impeccably restrained. Harrison was already there, deep in conversation with two older men I recognized as board members for the Vance Foundation. He gave me a curt nod but didn't break his conversation. Leo stood nearby, his Wharton class ring flashing as he gestured with a glass of scotch, regaling Chloe and her husband with some story about a hostile takeover. My cousin Nathan saw me first, breaking away from his group to give me a warm hug. "Alex, it's been way too long." His easy grin was a reminder of family holidays from a time before the dynamics had become so toxic. "How's the art world treating you?" "It's been an eventful year," I replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. "How's the clinic?" Nathan was the family's other outlier, a pediatrician who had chosen to work in a community health clinic instead of pursuing a lucrative private practice. Beatrice tolerated his choice because the doctor in the family still carried a certain social cachet, even if he wasn't maximizing his earning potential. Rewarding and exhausting, he laughed. But I doubt either of us are the main event tonight. The Beatrice show is about to start. As if on cue, Aunt Caroline swept in, a vision in deep amethyst with her much younger boyfriend in tow. She made a beeline for me, kissing my cheek and whispering, "Remember your steel spine, no matter what." Before I could answer, a palpable shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. Beatrice had arrived. At 65, my mother was still a striking woman. Tall, slender, with flawlessly coiffed blonde hair, and the kind of unshakable posture that privilege bestows. She wore a cream-colored designer gown that likely cost more than my first car. Her only jewelry, a single strand of pearls I knew to be a family heirloom. Harrison immediately glided to her side, playing the part of the adoring husband. Leo and Chloe followed, completing the perfect family portrait. I stayed where I was, observing the performance with a new, detached clarity. Everything, from Beatrice's precisely timed entrance to the strategic grouping of her favored children, was a piece of carefully constructed theater. Eventually, Beatrice made her way through the room, graciously accepting birthday tributes. When she finally got to me, her smile was fixed in place, but her eyes did a quick, critical scan of my appearance. As we sat for dinner, I watched the dynamics play out. I saw how Harrison would subtly direct conversations, how Chloe's seemingly confident pronouncements always ended with a fleeting glance toward Beatrice, seeking approval. After the main courses were cleared, Beatrice stood, drawing all eyes to her. "Before we have dessert, I just want to thank all of you for being here to celebrate with me." Her voice was imbued with the total self-assurance of a person who has never been questioned. Reaching 65 certainly gives one a sense of perspective on what's truly important: family, legacy, the values we pass down. A chorus of polite murmurs went around the table. She spoke for a few minutes about the foundation's work, about the importance of family unity. Then, her tone shifted. "Part of responsible family leadership," she said, her gaze sweeping across the table before it locked onto mine, "is making difficult decisions for the future, which is why Harrison and I have recently made some updates to our estate planning." The room grew quiet. This was highly unusual. Discussing wills and inheritance at a birthday party was a breach of their carefully curated social etiquette. "Most of our arrangements remain as they have been," Beatrice continued smoothly, "with one notable exception." She paused, letting the drama build. "After a great deal of reflection, we have made the decision to remove Alexandra from the primary inheritance structure." The silence was now absolute, thick with shock. Even those who knew our relationship was strained seemed taken aback by the sheer brutality of a public disinheritance. I could feel every eye in the room on me, their expressions a mix of pity, embarrassment, and morbid curiosity. "This is not a decision we took lightly," Beatrice added, her voice softening with a well-practiced display of concern. "But Alexandra has time and again chosen to distance herself from the family's responsibilities and opportunities. The Vance legacy requires stewardship from those who are fully committed to its values." Beside her, Harrison nodded with solemn gravity. Leo suddenly found his water glass fascinating. Chloe wore an expression that was a nauseating cocktail of feigned sympathy and overt satisfaction. The foundation board members looked deeply uncomfortable, but Beatrice wasn't done. We have, instead, established a much smaller trust that will provide for her basic security. It will be managed by the family office, of course, to ensure the funds are used responsibly. Sometimes the kindest form of love is providing structural guidance. The condescension was so thick, I could have cut it with a knife. To frame my disinheritance not as a punishment, but as an act of benevolent parenting, was a master stroke of manipulation. In the past, this moment would have shattered me. It would have triggered a tidal wave of shame and self-doubt. But now? Now it was almost comical. I smiled. A real, genuine smile that clearly rattled her. She'd been expecting tears, or anger, or at the very least, humiliated silence. She had not been expecting calm amusement. "Is there something you find entertaining, Alexandra?" she asked, the first crack appearing in her perfect, placid facade. "Actually, yes," I said, standing up, my voice perfectly steady. "That doesn't matter anymore, Mom, because I recently made a rather interesting discovery about our family's history." Beatrice's smile froze on her face as I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder Elena had prepared. "Did you happen to know," I asked, my tone light and conversational, "that Grandfather Edward was an art collector?" "My father dabbled," Beatrice dismissed with a wave of her hand. "He bought a few paintings. It was nothing of consequence." "That's not quite accurate," I continued, opening the folder. 6 months ago, I received a letter and a key that Grandfather arranged to have delivered to me on my 33rd birthday. It led me to a storage facility in Philadelphia, where he had placed an art collection he spent his life building. I slid a photograph of the collection's crown jewel across the table. This is just one piece. The full collection comprises over 200 works, many by artists who are now considered modern masters. Harrison snatched the photo, his expression instantly shifting from boredom to sharp, focused interest. "This looks like an early masterpiece by..." "Valued at approximately $15 million, I finished for him. "Yes, it is." Beatrice's face had gone chalky white. "If such a collection exists, it is part of the family estate, which I manage." And that's the most interesting part," I replied, pulling out the summary of the trust document. "You see, Grandfather established an irrevocable trust, naming his grandchildren as the sole beneficiaries. The collection legally belongs to me and my cousins, not to you, Mother." I handed copies of the summary to Harrison and the two stunned board members. The total appraised value of the collection is just over $85 million. The number hung in the air, a physical weight. Chloe's mouth literally fell open. Leo looked as if he'd been physically struck. "This is preposterous," Beatrice finally sputtered. "My father would never have created a trust that bypassed you completely," I finished for her. "But he did. The documentation has been vetted by the best art lawyers in the country. The trust is ironclad." Across the table, Aunt Caroline was smiling, openly, and she raised her wine glass to me in a silent toast. Nathan just looked gobsmacked but impressed. As I've spent the last 6 months having the collection properly secured, insured, and authenticated, I went on, "I've had a lot of time to consider what Grandfather Edward might have intended. He believed in art as a cultural treasure, not just a financial instrument. So, while I look forward to discussing my cousin's shares with them, I will not be liquidating pieces for short-term profit." Harrison's shock had already morphed into cold calculation. "This requires a more private discussion. Family matters should not be..." "Announced in public?" I interrupted. I couldn't agree more. And yet, here we are. Beatrice's composure finally shattered completely. "You've known about this for months? You said nothing, while we were here worrying about your financial future?" "Yes," I said simply. "I've known. Just as you've known about the trust funds my own father set up for me. funds that were mysteriously mismanaged and depleted after he died. Just as you've known about all the parts of our family's history you've selectively erased to maintain your control. The restaurant suddenly felt very small and very public. But the dam had broken, and there was no going back. Beatrice's face flushed with rage. "How dare you? How dare you ambush me at my own birthday party with these insane accusations? Whatever your grandfather left was family property," Harrison cut in, his voice steely, "that he had every legal right to dispose of as he saw fit," I countered, my voice calm but firm. "Just as you, apparently, had every right to announce my disinheritance in front of this entire room. The only difference is I'm not using my inheritance to control anyone." Harrison tried to regain control of the room. "This is highly inappropriate. We will continue this with our attorneys present." "My attorneys have already completed their work," I informed him. "The collection is secure, it is authenticated, and it is being managed by the trust. This isn't a negotiation, Harrison. This is a notification." Leo leaned forward, his business school instincts taking over. "If there's a collection worth $85 million, surely as family, we should all be part of it." "What about Chloe and me?" "The trust specifically names the grandchildren of Edward Sterling," I explained. "That means me, Nathan, and our cousins, Olivia, and Michael. It does not include step-grandchildren." Chloe's face hardened into a mask of bitter resentment. "How convenient for you," she spat, suddenly discovering a fortune that just happens to exclude us. "After all these years of what, Chloe?" I asked quietly. "Years of being told I was less important than you and Leo? Years of having my choices denigrated and my passions dismissed? Don't you dare pretend we have ever been treated as equals in this family." A waiter chose that precise, unfortunate moment to approach with the dessert cart. Beatrice waved him away with a furious flick of her wrist. "You orchestrated this entire spectacle to cause me maximum humiliation," she hissed, all pretense of maternal concern gone. "This vindictive, theatrical display proves exactly why you can't be trusted with significant assets. I didn't orchestrate a thing, Mother. Grandfather made these arrangements over 20 years ago. The timing of this dinner was your choice. But yes, I did wait until everything was legally fortified before I told you. Given your track record with managing family resources, it seemed like the only prudent thing to do." Nathan cleared his throat. "I think perhaps we should all just take a breath." "Stay out of this, Nathan," Beatrice snapped at him before turning her fury back to me. "You have no idea what you're doing. A collection of that value requires sophisticated management, international contacts, complex tax strategies." "Actually," I said, "that is exactly what I do for a living. I manage important collections for clients all over the world. I've built the very career you've spent a decade belittling as playing shop girl. In reality, I've become one of the most respected private curators in my field." Harrison tried a new tactic, his voice becoming smooth and conciliatory. "Alexandra, no one is questioning your enthusiasm, but managing wealth of this magnitude requires a different kind of experience. Let us help you." "The way you helped yourselves to the funds in my father's trust?" I asked, the words sharper than I intended. The room fell silent again. I hadn't planned on saying that, but the memory, long suppressed, had been simmering for years. "I don't know what you're talking about," Beatrice said far too quickly. "When I turned 30, I had an independent advisor review the trust Dad left for me," I stated, my voice cold and clear. "The original documents showed its value should have been nearly double what I received. There were decades of exorbitant management fees paid to Vance Investments, along with a series of disastrous investments in Harrison's own projects." Aunt Caroline spoke up, her voice ringing with clarity. "Arthur always worried about that. He told me he'd set up protections, but after he died, Beatrice took control," I finished. just like she's controlled every story in this family. The story of how grandfather was a failed businessman, not a visionary collector. The story of how my career is a frivolous hobby, not a professional success. The story of how everything has to revolve around the great and powerful Vance name. Beatrice shot to her feet. I will not be spoken to like this. Not by my own daughter. You have no comprehension of the sacrifices I have made for this family. I understand sacrifice better than you know, I replied, my voice quiet but unyielding. I sacrificed a relationship with my family to build a life on my own terms. I worked multiple jobs so I would never have to take money that came with your strings attached. I created my own security while you offered only conditional support. The two board members exchanged a mortified glance and began to quietly gather their belongings. Realizing the social catastrophe unfolding, Beatrice shifted tactics in a blink. Her expression melted into one of practiced worry. Alexandra, darling, you're clearly overwrought. We only want what's best for you. Let's discuss all of this tomorrow, shall we? When emotions aren't running quite so high. The abrupt pivot to concerned mother was so transparently false, it was almost funny. I'm not overwrought, mother. For the first time in my life, I am perfectly clear about where I stand. I don't need to be in your will. I don't need to be in your family portraits or your foundation's brochures. I have my own legacy now. Harrison made one last desperate attempt. The legal challenges to a trust like this would be enormous. Art of that value, hidden for decades. There will be questions of provenance, tax implications, all addressed, I assured him. Grandfather kept meticulous records of every single purchase. The collection has been reported to the IRS with all necessary filings completed. And most importantly, the art itself is now in a new, secure location that only the trust administrators can access. The color drained from Beatrice's face. She suddenly looked her age. You've been planning this. I've been building an independent life for years, I corrected her gently. Finding the collection just confirmed I was on the right path. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, finally blurted out her real concern. So what happens now? To the art? Do we each get a share? Is it being sold? How much is our piece worth? Her naked greed would have been comical in any other context. Harrison was already on his phone, no doubt texting his lawyer. Beatrice, having recovered a sliver of her composure, attempted one last act of damage control. This has all been quite a shock, she said with a brittle laugh, turning to her remaining guests. Family surprises. Now who's ready for dessert? Her attempt to normalize the situation was a spectacular failure. The atmosphere in the room was that of a battlefield after the smoke has cleared. Aunt Caroline caught my eye and gave me a slow, deliberate nod of approval. I stood and gathered my purse. I think I'll skip dessert. Thank you for the invitation, Mother. Happy birthday. You're just leaving? Beatrice's voice held a note of genuine disbelief. In every conflict we'd ever had, I was always the one who eventually caved. I apologized. I accommodated. Not this time. Yes. Mark is waiting for me. I turned to the others. I apologize for the disruption. As I walked toward the door, I heard Harrison mutter, "We'll fight this, Beatrice. We can challenge the trust." I paused at the threshold and turned back one last time. One more thing. In his letter, Grandfather wrote that he always regretted how the pursuit of money overshadowed any appreciation for beauty and creativity in this family. He hoped this collection might change that for future generations. You might want to consider that before you launch a legal battle that would only serve to deplete the very assets you're so desperate to get your hands on. And with that, I walked out, leaving behind the deafening silence of a family whose world had just been turned upside down. Outside, the cool night air of Chicago felt fresh and full of promise. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Mark. It's done. Coming home. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from my family's drama without a single ounce of its weight on my shoulders. Whatever storms were to come, I was finally, irrevocably, standing on my own ground. The weeks after Beatrice's birthday were as chaotic as I'd anticipated. Just as he'd promised, Harrison unleashed a team of lawyers to contest the trust, their primary claim being that Edward Sterling hadn't been of sound mind. Their case crumbled when my grandfather's original attorney, now in his late 80s but still sharp as a tack, provided a videotape deposition from the time of the trust's creation. On the tape, my grandfather explicitly stated his reasons for bypassing Beatrice, noting her lack of appreciation for art beyond its monetary value and his fear that she would liquidate his life's passion. Beatrice then tried a different tactic, calling me directly. Her voice, stripped of its usual commanding tone, was laced with an unnerving sweetness as she suggested we work together as a family to manage the collection. "I've always had an appreciation for fine art, Alexandra," she claimed, a statement so patently false it was insulting. "We could build something truly meaningful." "The trust is already building something meaningful," I replied coolly. "We're in the process of establishing a foundation to provide grants for emerging artists and to fund arts education programs." The conversation ended when she realized her attempts at manipulation were getting her nowhere. A few days later, Chloe called with the guilt trip approach. "Mom is just so hurt by all this," she began, her voice thick with fake concern. "Her health isn't what it used to be, you know. The stress—" "Chloe," I interrupted, my voice gentle but firm. "I spent 33 years of my life trying to win Mom's approval. I am not responsible for her emotional reaction to a decision my grandfather made 2 decades ago." My half-sister's tone turned to ice. "You've turned your back on this family after everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me, Chloe?" I asked her, my voice quiet. "When have you ever, once, treated me as an equal instead of a problem to be managed?" Her stunned silence was all the answer I needed. In the midst of the family fallout, I pushed forward. I worked with my cousins, who were all gobsmacked but thrilled by their unexpected inheritance, and we officially formed the Sterling Arts Trust. Nathan, with his community-first mindset, took the lead on developing educational outreach for underserved schools. Olivia, ever the pragmatist, helped structure the finances for long-term sustainability. Together, we decided to curate a special exhibition of 30 key pieces, which we titled The Hidden Collector, Edward Sterling's Visionary Eye. The exhibition opened at a prestigious Chicago gallery 6 months after that fateful birthday dinner. I sent invitations to the entire family, not expecting any of them to show up. To my astonishment, Aunt Caroline arrived, beaming, proudly touring the gallery and regaling guests with stories of her father's secret passion. "He used to sneak me to galleries when Beatrice was busy with her social calendar," she told me. "It was our little secret." Even more shocking was the appearance of Leo. He came alone and seemed unusually subdued. He walked through the exhibition slowly, actually studying the paintings instead of just looking for the value placards. "I never knew art could feel like this," he admitted when he found me. "Growing up, it was just assets hanging on the walls." "That's what Grandfather wanted to change," I told him. He nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Mother and Harrison aren't coming, obviously, but I'd like to learn more about this, about what he saw." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an opening. It was the first authentic connection we had ever shared. The exhibition was a critical success, earning rave reviews that celebrated my grandfather's prescient taste and our family's decision to share the collection with the public. Several major museums began making inquiries about future donations of key works. What had started as a private inheritance was transforming into a public cultural legacy. Through it all, Mark was my anchor. He never once suggested we should uproot our lives because of the money. "This just gives you the freedom to do exactly what you've always wanted to do," he said. "Nothing more, nothing less." He was right. The collection was my security, but I continued my own curatorial work, now with the liberating freedom to champion artists I believed in. without the constant pressure of financial necessity. We eventually moved into a slightly larger apartment, but we stayed in the same neighborhood we loved. The most profound change was being able to establish a scholarship fund in my father's name for art students from low-income backgrounds, creating the kind of opportunity I had so desperately needed myself. 3 months after the exhibition opening, Beatrice reached out again, this time through her assistant, requesting a meeting. I thought about it for a long time before agreeing to coffee at a neutral hotel lobby. She arrived on time, looking older and less formidable than I remembered. After a few minutes of strained pleasantries, she got to the point. The exhibition was impressive, she conceded, staring into her cup. Several of our foundation's board members attended. They were quite taken with it. I'm glad they enjoyed it. Your grandfather and we had a difficult relationship, she said, the words clearly costing her. He never approved of my focus on financial security. He just had different priorities, I said, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Perhaps, she continued, struggling, I have been inflexible about certain things, your career path, for instance. For Beatrice, this halting, roundabout admission was the equivalent of a full-blown apology. I decided to meet her partway. We've both been stubborn, I offered. I could have been better at communicating my choices instead of just pulling away. A quiet moment passed between us. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just different. The family Christmas gathering is next month, she said finally. The invitation is, of course, open to you and to Mark. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement. The scales had permanently shifted, and in that new balance, there was space for a different kind of relationship to grow, one based on mutual respect, not on control and rebellion. We'll think about it, I replied, and I meant it. As winter melted into spring, my life settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. The Sterling Arts Trust was thriving. Mark and I got engaged, planning a small, intimate ceremony with our chosen family of friends. I maintained a cautious but civil contact with Beatrice, accepting that our relationship would likely never be warm, but it could be peaceful. Most importantly, I continued to build a life that honored both my father's loving support and my grandfather's unexpected gift. It wasn't just a financial legacy, it was the courage to see beauty where others saw only dollar signs. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I would imagine my father and my grandfather watching me, proud. They had both tried, in their own ways, to protect my spirit. Their efforts were messy and imperfect, interrupted by death and derailed by family politics, but in the end they had succeeded. They hadn't shielded me from hardship. They had planted the seeds of resilience that grew stronger with every challenge. The greatest inheritance I received wasn't the art collection, as priceless as it was. It was the freedom to define success on my own terms, to build a life driven by passion instead of obligation. In finding my grandfather's hidden legacy, I had finally truly found my own way forward. One painting, one choice, one brave moment at a time. Have you ever had to push back against family expectations to forge your own path? What gave you the strength to draw that line in the sand? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below, and if this story of finding independence resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to claim your own legacy. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you all find the courage to honor your own. End of story.